Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Eddie Rice, speechwriter, nonfiction book marketing expert, podcast guesting strategist. And he helps authors, experts, and entrepreneurs turn their ideas into books, conversations, and opportunities. He's also an author. He has written several books, so we'll talk about all that. Welcome to the show, Eddie.
Oh, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show. Welcome to India in this online comedy. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. Talk about how one can turn their book into marketing success for them. So we'll talk about all this. But before that, Eddie, let's talk about a bit about your background, your journey, so that the audience knows who they are listening to.
Of course. I've had a very roundabout way of where I've gotten to today. I started out as a teacher, teaching eighth grade science, then went and became a freelance writer where I focused on speech writing. And then from there, I bounced around from a few various jobs and really kept the speech writing on the side. And it wasn't until probably about the middle of COVID that I actually finished my first book, Toast: Short Speeches, Big Impact. And today I'm fully employed while at the same time helping authors and speakers craft their message to tell their story to the world.
Absolutely. Helping them to tell their story to the world. So, what is the most difficult part, difficult challenge that these authors and all these people face in terms of their book? Is it writing a book? Is it marketing? Or is it something more?
It's a little bit of both, to be honest. What I found when I was writing Toast, Short Speeches, Big Impact, is that I actually wrote it alone. I didn't tell anyone about it. I didn't promote it. I didn't test out the ideas inside of it. So I had no launch pad when it was finally ready to be published and given to the market. So it's really a combination of the two where if I could do it all over again, I would focus on promoting the book while I wrote it and then having that momentum to ride when I actually launched it. So yeah, it's both at the same time, and I think a lot of authors don't realize that we write in the dark way too often, and only when it's published do we then decide to go out and promote.
Right. But the practical thing you see, Eddie, is that while you are writing, you don't know even there will be a publisher or it will be self-published. So how do you suggest people build an audience before they publish? How do they start marketing about a book which about the future of which they themselves don't know? What do you suggest in such situations?
There's a few things you can do. The most important thing is to build your email list. Email converts far better than paid ads. It converts far better than social media. And it's a relationship that you have with your readers on your email list that if you are giving them the same type of writing and content that's on your email list that's going to be in your book, you can validate that idea ahead of time. And you can take that email list to a publisher and say, look, I've got 50,000 people waiting for my book. Or you can say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and release it to those 50,000 people on my email list and, make the profits myself. So of course, 50,000 is a very lofty goal, but it's just an example, but it's something that's really important that you still want to have some sort of stretch goal to reach with your email list. And that's probably one of the most important things to do while you're still writing your book, still trying to find your market and your target reader. Build that list and you'll have all of that you need and more.
Right. So is it very important that they get someone from outside to help them with this, or they can do it themselves? Many of the authors have their own ways. They are experts. They know about things. They know about writing. But this extra work is sometimes can be almost like a burden for their mind.
Oh, very much, very much. I mean, I felt the same way. I know exactly what these authors are going through when you're just writing a book that is your sole focus, and it's really hard to do anything else. You don't want to post on social media. You don't want to write a newsletter. You don't want to work on your website. That's incredibly hard. So, yes, I do suggest that you find a partner, that you find someone that you trust that can help you set very specific, actionable goals to help you achieve what you want to achieve or to actually execute for you, whether that's a ghostwriter, someone who's going to handle your social media, someone who's going to help you just get your done. You need to get done that's not writing. All of those things are definitely possible, but it's not always the reality that you have that extra budget to do that. So it's really comes down to time management and your own productivity as to how you balance the two out. And you have to convince yourself book writing are just one and the same. And that's just
Right. So you talk about some of the big mistakes that authors make when they try to market their books. What are some of these mistakes so that people can, especially authors can learn from your tips?
it's so dependent on, I think, the author's audience and who they're trying to reach. I just know that there are certain things that don't convert very well initially. One of those is social media, where the people are on there to browse, they're on there for entertainment, they're not necessarily looking for their next book. And at the same time, though, there are authors that really work on the SEO for their website, but that can take years to pay off to rank for very highly competitive terms. So I think, though, taking a step back, what really hurts a lot of authors is they truly don't know their ideal reader. We have very fuzzy ideas of who it is that we're writing to. And sometimes we're writing to our own ego, we're writing to an audience of one. And instead, we should take a little bit of extra time to really try and figure out who is our target reader, what are their problems, and is my book going to solve those problems? And if you can answer that question early on, it's going to be a much easier journey to write your book.
Right. So, what do these authors, all those people who are writing their book or planning to write a book, what is it that they generally come to you for, Eddie? What are the questions that you generally get for them? I want to get a sense of what actually happens on the ground. What is it that actually brings trouble to such authors and you solve for them?
Sure. I've got a few areas that I help out the most. First is with speech writing. A lot of authors come to me saying, hey, I want to give a TED talk. I want to turn my book into a keynote speech. How do I take the written word and turn it into something that is going to be memorable and enjoyable by the audience? So we work closely one-on-one. It's a true partnership where we iterate on various outlines that turn into drafts, that turn into the final product, and then I give feedback on their presentation and their delivery skills. And very similarly to that, the same types of authors really want to go on to podcasts, just like I'm doing today, to promote their work. And they don't know how to pitch. They don't know how to research. They don't know which shows are necessarily appropriate for them at a certain point in their career. And I help them put together that strategy that gets them booked onto the shows. Now, of course, they have to pitch themselves because most hosts want to hear from the talent and not a PR rep on the outside. So I help, refine the pitch and then, of course, talk them through and coach them through effective interview techniques and how to answer tough questions and get them ready for the main stage.
Absolutely, absolutely. And talking of podcast guesting for authors, why do you say that podcast guesting is such an underrated strategy for authors? Why do you think so?
I think a lot of authors tend to be somewhat introverted and they don't think of themselves as wanting to put themselves out there and present themselves or brag about their work, where in fact, a podcast is the perfect environment, even if you are introverted, because it's a conversation that you get to have with the host and in turn, the audience who's listening and tuning in. You get to talk for 15, 20, 30 minutes. I mean, 3 hours for some of the podcasts out there, the really big ones. And you get to form that relationship with an audience that goes far beyond social media. It goes far beyond paid ads, goes far beyond your email list. And if you can have that conversation and answer people's questions and they get to know you, that's the perfect environment in which to sell a book without having to sound salesy.
Absolutely. So, what is it that they should be doing? They Several of these authors, or before the release, after the release, between the release, so many authors are there everywhere. What is the best way for them to move? Should they do it themselves? Should they get a big agency for them? Or what is the best way that should work for them? Because by the time they come to several, I do several interviews, I have my own observations, but I want to understand what is the best strategy for this. But I must tell you, there are many authors, and sometimes in some of the interviews they think that it's going to be a book review, it's going to be an interview like we are talking. You have got a couple of books, but we are not doing a book review. Many people almost want to send their book, whereas we are not doing book reviews. We are talking about them, their expertise, as well as in this particular show, part of that, the book as part of that conversation, and not a book review. I want to understand then what would be the best strategy for them to to make use of this underrated thing called the podcast.
Well, I think the first part of that strategy is to listen to the podcast that you want to go on before you go on them. So you understand the flow of the show, that you understand that, hey, this is not a book review. This is what the host likes to talk about. It's going back to understanding your ideal reader, but in this case, it's your ideal podcast host. And really then asking second, what are the needs of my audience? What does the audience want to get out of this? What do they want to take from it that I can teach them? And that's a lot of what I put in my pitches to podcast hosts is I say, look, I can teach your audience the 3 following things or the 5 following things. And I list off the ideas. So it's really more of an educational session and a conversation rather than a sales pitch. No one wants to sit here and listen to me talk about any of my books for half an hour. And I definitely won't do that. Instead, I'd much rather talk about the strategy behind podcast guesting or the strategy behind being an author. And you can learn a lot of that on your own. You don't need a big agency to pitch for you. Instead, you can do a lot of this DIY.
Absolutely. What about book tours? Are they still relevant for authors? Are they not? Book tours in real life is okay, but in podcast guesting, a book tour is a book tour, and it may lead to fatigue. I want to, several of the big podcasters also, I've read some of their interviews. They are all also creating boundaries in terms of, not taking interviews of those people who are on book tours. Otherwise, it becomes, they start losing their audience.
Right. If you come off too promotional in your pitch to a podcast host, they are going to turn you away immediately. But as for book tours, I think a lot of them have moved online, whereas in the past they were done in person at bookstores, at cafes. And I think to pull something like that off today, you need a very devoted following who's going to show up for you. Whereas if you do it virtually through online conferences, through podcast guesting, that audience is already there and they're listening and tuning in. So it's a little bit easier to reach them. But going back to the previous point, when you do reach them, you want to give value, you want to teach, you want to educate, you want to talk about how to help people solve their problems rather than about yourself.
Absolutely, absolutely. All I can say is your business is will be on a rise, Eddie, because the number of authors they want is also rising at a very fast pace. Talking of because I have recently opened one, come out with a new podcast, The Author's Voice with KAJ, and there it is like so that during my shows here I am not able to talk much about the book, so that is where I actually pick up one book of a particular author, and then we discuss about that. And I can tell you that's why I said it's on a rise, is that the guesting requests are much more on a new podcast from authors than a very established one as this one. So it's so much on the rise. But one thing I always notice it is that people who come to this particular podcast, they are very not nice, their coordination is not nice. I never take them on that particular, because you already know, and this is here because I do not have pre sort of an interview sort of a thing, and this only makes the foundation of that particular, whether I will bring, because that is much more of a wider chance, and I want to give only to those people who actually deserve it in the right earnest, and not just, people who are on book tours or something like that. That is where I said a lot of good authors are also coming, and it feels very good to talk to them, to learn from them. And I'm sure a lot of more authors will understand the benefits of podcasting on the right podcast. And that's the way to go. In terms of your book, you have written a couple of books. Tell us a bit about your book. What have you written on those? Two books: Toast, Short Speeches, Big Impact, and then there is a new one.
Yes. So Toast Short Speeches, Big Impact was really geared towards people who have to give a wedding toast, or they have to give a short toast for a person's retirement. The goal was to take people through the short steps in writing us toast and creating a great speech. And then the other books that I've written, they have not been released yet. I'm still in the process of writing them. One is called Out of the Valley, From Invisible to In Demand. And then the other is Speak to Sell, the podcast guest playbook. That one's pretty self-explanatory, but Out of the Valley, what it talks about is what should authors do when things get tough? What should they do when they're ready to give up? And it talks a little bit about motivation, psychology, identity-based motivation, and then very practical strategies for how to get out of the valley and then also become known in the world where you're trying to promote your work.
Absolutely. And you talk about podcast, marketing strategies. If I understand, you also talk about worst book marketing advice you hear and what authors should do instead. Tell us about this worst marketing strategy that authors adopt.
Let's see here. Yes. It's so hard to say this out loud, but I think when just absolutely doing nothing or hiding in the dark and not getting any help from any person out there is what holds most authors back. And it's probably the worst marketing advice in the world, is to just write in the dark and hope that people will pick up your book. They'll find it by osmosis. You have to be out there promoting it. You have to be able to be found on SEO. You have to have that engaged email list. You have to do all of the things almost. And it takes a lot of effort and a lot of planning. And a lot of authors don't know that going in. They think the book is just it, and all the opportunities will come afterwards, and it won't.
Absolutely. And what are the expectations one author should have from a person like you? Should they think, just because we have got in touch with Eddie, should they have lots of expectation, or should they know that after all it's only their book and that book has to sell? Eddie can only do as much as possible.
Yes, I'm very clear with my clients ahead of time as to what work they're going to do, what work I'm going to do. And we have a very clear contract and relationship as to how this is all going to work in the end. I'm very much more of a strategist and a coach. I'm not a done for you, just get this done in a week type service where you can just pay me X amount of dollars and I'll get you onto 50 podcasts. It doesn't work that way. It's not transactional. Instead, I want to work with you. I want to coach with you and get you through whatever your problems are and get you on the right path to achieving your goals.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's much to learn about all these things from you, Eddie. And I'm sure a lot of people, a lot of authors and others would like to connect with you, learn more about you, your services, and be your client. What's the best way for them to connect with you, Eddie?
Yes, the best place to go is eloquentmind.co, not .com because the domain was way too expensive, but eloquentmind.co. And you can book a free strategy session with me where we'll talk for 30 minutes about how I can best help you. And we can go from there in terms of working together or finding courses or resources that will help you get to the point where you can work with someone like me, because it is a lot to take on. But I do want to help those that really want to put in the effort and that want to be true partners with me. So yes, eloquentmind.co. Go there, book a free strategy session with me, and I'd love to talk with you about your goals as an author.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.